Hey guys, tonight we're slipping on our imaginary sandals and wandering straight into the damp, echoey world of Roman public bathrooms. The air is thick with steam, the floor is slick with mystery puddles, and the scent is, well, a complicated mix of lavender oil and poor drainage. You can hear the chatter of toga-clad citizens, the clink of coins, and somewhere, faintly, the unmistakable sound of water gurgling through ancient pipes. You step into a Roman bathhouse, and you're immediately engulfed in warm mist and the hushed murmur of gossip. Bronze statues line the walls, half-naked senators stroll past you as if they're walking into a boardroom, and over in the corner, someone's arguing about grain prices while casually scrubbing his armpits with olive oil. You, meanwhile, are just trying to figure out where to sit without offending a deity or slipping on a tile. The thing is, Roman bathhouses were everywhere. Seriously, you could barely throw a sponge on a stick without hitting a public toilet, bath, or fountain. You might expect one or two in a big city, but Rome had over 900 public baths at its peak. 900. That's more than the number of Starbucks in some states. And then there were the latrines, public toilets, peppered around every market, forum, and busy street. Because when you've got over 1 million people packed into a city, you can't rely on chamber pots and wishful thinking. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You make your way deeper into the bathhouse. A slave hands you a strigil, a curved metal tool Romans used to scrape dirt and oil off their skin. He gestures toward a marble bench, slick with condensation, and you cautiously sit down, hoping the rumors about scorpions in the changing rooms are just that, rumors. Around you, patricians and plebeians soak in the tepidarium, the warm room, sweat it out in the caldarium, the hot room, and cool off in the frigidarium, which, let's be honest, sounds like the worst kind of surprise. You're beginning to realize that bathing in ancient Rome wasn't just about getting clean. It was an event, a social ritual. A spa day meets town hall meeting meets gym meets dinner party. Everyone came here, rich, poor, young, old. If you lived in the Roman world and skipped your daily bath, you'd be the ancient equivalent of that guy on the subway no one wants to stand next to. Of course, hygiene was only part of the appeal. Roman baths were loud. They echoed with conversation, singing, footfalls, and the occasional political debate shouted over splashing water. Think less tranquil spa and more Walmart on Black Friday, but wetter. Still, there was something oddly comforting about the chaos. Maybe it was the rhythm of everyday life echoing off the tile walls, the sound of a city doing its business, in more ways than one. And just to ground you in a historical tidbit, the Emperor Caracalla, best remembered for murdering his brother in their mother's arms, built one of the grandest bath complexes in history. The baths of Caracalla weren't just large, they were colossal. The site covered 33 acres and could accommodate up to 1,600 bathers at a time. It had libraries, gardens, fountains, mosaics, and enough hot water to cook a whole legion's worth of pasta. Historians still argue whether these megabaths were built as a public service or a PR stunt. Caracalla wasn't exactly Mr. Popularity, but they agree on one thing. The Roman bathhouse wasn't optional. It was the lifeblood of the city. And now you're there, towels slung awkwardly over your shoulder, assuming you brought one, navigating a sea of sweaty elbows and philosophical debates. You try to relax. You really do. But you can't help wondering, why so many public bathrooms? Was Rome just that clean obsessed? Or did something else drive this obsession with scrubbing, soaking, and sponge sharing? You lean back against the warm stone wall. A flute player pipes something tuneless in the next room. Somewhere nearby, a senator loudly complains about spoiled garum. That's fermented fish sauce. In case you're curious, a drop of condensation lands on your shoulder. You've only just begun to understand how deep the aqueduct flows. But don't worry, you're not getting out of this bathhouse just yet. You're still sitting there, trying not to slide off your damp marble bench, when it hits you literally. A faint drip from the domed ceiling above. Welcome to Roman plumbing. It's more impressive than you might think. And yes, it's the secret sauce behind those hundreds of public baths and toilets. You look around and wonder, how did a civilization from over 2,000 years ago get this much water moving so consistently? The answer, of course, is aqueducts. You probably learned about them in school. Those iconic stone arches snaking across hillsides. But what textbooks often gloss over is just how obsessive the Romans were about moving water. And we're not talking a little stream. We're talking 300 million gallons a day flowing into the city of Rome at its peak. That's enough water to fill nearly 500 Olympic-sized pools. Every single day. All without a single electric pump. You watch as a worker refills one of the bathhouse basins from a cleverly hidden pipe in the wall. The water flows with a quiet confidence, pulled only by gravity and the genius of Roman engineering. The aqueducts brought water from as far as 60 miles away, gliding over valleys and hills with almost arrogant precision. Some say the Aqua Marcia, one of the longest aqueducts, delivered the coldest, cleanest water the empire ever tasted. Romans were picky like that, and the water didn't just go to the rich. That's the quirky part. Public fountains, baths, and even toilets were placed across the city, accessible to regular folks. In fact, wealthy people were taxed to fund the water supply for everyone else. Picture Jeff Bezos paying for your hot shower and afternoon splash fight. That's the Roman way. You make your way toward the Latrines, the communal toilets. They're in a separate chamber off the main baths, where a long marble bench lines the wall, riddled with well holes. No stalls, no privacy. You just sit next to your neighbor and do what nature demands. It's a bonding experience, really. And just when you're wondering how you're supposed to clean up afterward, someone walks by carrying a tersorium, a sponge attached to a stick, shared, rinsed in a water channel flowing in front of the bench. That's your toilet paper, my friend. Historians still argue whether Romans truly reused the same sponge or kept personal ones tucked into their tunics. Either way, it adds a whole new meaning to "don't drop the stick." There's a bit of an olfactory assault going on in here, too. The ventilation isn't great, but Romans weren't clueless about scent. They hung fragrant herbs and burned incense. Some even installed clever chimneys to pull the stink upward and out. Others just hoped your nose got used to it. And then there's the sewer system. You might be surprised to learn that the Romans had a functioning underground sewage network, the Cloaca Maxima, or Great Sewer. Originally built to drain swamps and manage rainwater, it evolved into a fully integrated wastewater system. Think of it as the ancient world's digestive tract, humming quietly beneath your feet while bathers above soaked in eucalyptus-scented oblivion. But the real twist? This infrastructure wasn't just for cities like Rome. It extended across the empire. You'd find aqueducts in Gaul, toilets in Britain, and bathhouses in Tunisia. Even far-flung outposts like Vindolanda, near Hadrian's Wall in northern England, had communal loos. Imagine trudging through the rain-soaked highlands, chilled to the bone, only to find a toasty bathhouse waiting for you. Civilization, Roman style. You hear a splash nearby. A group of kids just cannonballed into one of the smaller pools. Not exactly allowed, but nobody stops them. Roman baths were family places too. Kids, soldiers, old men, everyone got a turn. Though, there were certain hours reserved for women and others for men. A bit of scheduling etiquette. And of course, status mattered. Senators might lounge in one corner, while freedmen kept to their own. Still, the fact that they all came here, that's something. You begin to feel the rhythm of the space. Water sloshing, voices murmuring, stone echoing each sound like a seashell. It's oddly hypnotic. And you realize this constant flow of water and people wasn't just about hygiene, it was about control. The empire controlled water, therefore it controlled life. It shaped cities, decided where people gathered, and influenced how they interacted. Water wasn't just utility, it was power. The Emperor Augustus once boasted he found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble. But he might have just as accurately said he left it a city of pipes. Because those invisible veins beneath the marble made everything possible. A boy runs by with a bucket, splashing your ankles. You don't even flinch anymore. You're part of it now. One more bather in a vast system of steam, stone, and strategy. You lean back against the wall, marveling at how all this was built without machines, computers, or modern tools. Just brains, brute force, and a slightly concerning obsession with drainage. The warm air continues to cling to your skin as you drift into a daze, letting the muffled chatter and splash of water create a sleepy background rhythm. You're now fully immersed in Roman public bath culture, and just when you think things can't get weirder, someone walks by wearing sandals with metal soles. Not exactly beachwear. Turns out, Roman bathhouses weren't just about getting clean. They were social theaters, and everyone came dressed to impress, within reason. You glance around and see people in various states of undress, wrapped in towels or light tunics, lounging like lizards on warm stone benches. The air smells of olive oil, citrus peels, and, strangely, fermented fish sauce, garum, a Roman condiment so beloved it practically counts as perfume to them. You wrinkle your nose, but hey, when in Rome, a servant passes carrying a tray of snacks. Dried figs, honey-soaked nuts, and tiny bits of bread dipped in, you guessed it, more garum. Apparently, lounging in lukewarm water works up an appetite. But don't imagine some five-star spa. This isn't candlelight and whale music. It's lively, slightly chaotic, and, depending on who's sitting next to you, kinda smelly. Still, it was the place to be. The Thermi were more than just bathhouses. They were part gym, part day spa, part social network. Think of them like a Roman Facebook, only with more sweat and less arguing over memes. You could catch up on gossip, hire a tutor for your kid, listen to a poet recite verses, or bribe someone for insider Senate info, right there in the steam room. And yes, actual business deals happened here. The Roman version of a power lunch involved being mostly naked. Historians still argue whether these bathhouses actually promoted healthy living or just disguised it under layers of hot air and self-importance. But one thing's certain, they kept people coming back. You wander through the different rooms. First, the frigidarium, a cold plunge pool that shocks your skin like stepping into melted snow. Then the tepidarium, a lukewarm chamber where your pores start to open and your limbs loosen. Finally, the caldarium, a humid, almost suffocating room where water drips from the ceiling and you feel like a vegetable being slowly steamed. Romans moved through this sequence like clockwork, believing it purified the body and soothed the soul. Sort of like an ancient detox plan, only without Instagram influencers. In the caldarium, You spot a man lying flat while another scrapes his skin with a strigil, a curved metal tool that looks part spoon, part torture device. Romans didn't use soap like we do. They slathered themselves in oil, then scraped it off along with dead skin and grime. It's oddly satisfying to watch, like peeling off a sticker in one smooth motion. The oily mixture was often collected and reused for tanning leather or even medical ointments. Because why waste anything, right? You pause near a painted wall. The murals here are vivid: mermaids, dolphins, gods holding water jugs. Some are surprisingly risque. Apparently, Roman bath decor walked a fine line between art and softcore mural. But no one seems scandalized. This is just how things are. And in a weird way, the open, communal atmosphere makes it all feel normal. Nearby, a group of older men are playing dice and arguing over who cheated last week. Gambling was illegal in most places, but in bathhouses, totally fine. The rules sort of bent in here, as if steamy air somehow fogged up morality. You hear a young man reciting something. Turns out, Roman bathhouses often featured live performances. Musicians, poets, even philosophers would drop by to perform for a soaking audience. Imagine Plato giving a TED Talk while everyone's wearing nothing but towels. One fringe theory suggests that some bathhouses even had small libraries attached, though historians still debate how widespread that was. Moisture and scrolls don't mix particularly well, so if any existed, they probably didn't last long. You pass a woman having her hair braided while sipping watered wine. That's another Roman quirk: they never drank wine straight. It was always diluted, usually with cool water. Drinking it pure was seen as barbaric. So, if you're imagining a bunch of toga-clad bros chugging from amphory like frat boys, think again. Romans were refined even in their vice. Outside, vendors sell trinkets and cosmetics. You overhear someone advertising crocodile dung face cream. Yes, that was real. Supposedly, it kept skin youthful. You're starting to realize Roman beauty tips walked the line between genius and unhinged. But hey, it's not like our era's any better. Snail mucin serums. Anyone? As you towel off, you notice something odd. No one seems to be in a rush. Time bends in this place. People spend hours here, soaking, chatting, eating, scraping, lounging. There's no concept of a quick rinse. In fact, public bathing was a daily routine for many. Some would go twice a day, once in the morning and again in the evening, especially if they had dinner plans. Because in Rome, showing up unwashed was as offensive as bringing up politics at a wedding. And speaking of politics, plenty of it happened in these steamy halls. Senators, military officers, merchants, they all mingled here, making alliances, whispering deals. In a society built on hierarchy, the bathhouse was one of the few places where power and poverty shared a bench. Sure, you could tell who had money by their servants or sandals, but in the end, everyone soaked in the same water. And everyone pooped on the same marble bench. It's democracy, Roman style. Your skin is still warm from the steam, your limbs loose like cooked noodles, and yet, something pulls your curiosity deeper. You wander past the heated chambers and communal pools and spot a lesser-used corridor. It smells different, less of perfume and olive oil, more like something you'd politely call earthy. You follow it anyway because tonight you're not just here to soak. You're here to uncover why the Romans had so many public bathrooms in the first place. Down the hall is a row of arched doorways, each leading into what looks like a long marble bench with evenly spaced holes carved into it. No stalls, no privacy. Just stone seats in a row open to all. Congratulations, you've found yourself in a Roman latrine. And yes, you're meant to sit right there, next to someone else, maybe two someones, maybe 15 someones, because Roman toilets weren't shy affairs. They were communal, loud, and oddly social. You get the sense that someone, somewhere, once tried to break up with their boyfriend while pooping, and no one batted an eye. Historians still argue whether this shared toileting experience was born out of necessity, architectural convenience, or some deep-seated Roman belief in togetherness. Probably a mix of all three. But one thing's clear: the Romans didn't just accept this setup, they embraced it. And now that you're here, you might as well learn the ropes. First, no toilet paper. That didn't exist yet. Instead, they used a tersorium, a sponge attached to a stick. It sat in a water channel at the base of the latrine, waiting to be shared by the next user. Yes, shared. One sponge, many butts. Let that lull you to sleep tonight. But before you freak out completely, remember this was a culture obsessed with water and cleanliness. They did rinse the sponge between uses, most of the time. The channel at your feet constantly runs with water, washing away waste and soaking the tersoria. Think of it like an ancient bidet system, if bidets came with a potential dose of intestinal roulette. Some latrines even had perfumed water basins nearby to refresh the sponge. And occasionally, someone would add vinegar or salt to the rinsing water, an early attempt at disinfection. Still, if you're squirming, you're not alone. Even some ancient authors commented on how uncivilized these public bathrooms felt. But for most Romans, this was just another part of daily life. As you sit and ponder your modern blessings, a conversation erupts at the far end of the latrine. Two men are arguing, probably about politics or whose mule is faster. It's oddly normal. People here talk, laugh, plan dinner parties, make deals, all while doing their business. The lack of privacy somehow brings people together, in an awkward, slightly gross way. And here's the thing: Rome didn't just have a few public toilets. They had hundreds. Archaeologists have uncovered latrines in forums, near theaters, beside markets, and especially attached to bathhouses. These weren't afterthoughts, they were built into the city's layout. Designed, planned, essential. You can almost imagine the city planner sketching out a new district and saying, "Yes, we'll put the bakery here, and the toilets? 10 paces to the left." One quirky discovery: some latrines had carved graffiti above the seats. Things like, "Cacator cave malum," "Pooper, beware of evil," or even crude love poems. Apparently, even back then, people liked to leave their mark in the most undignified places. But why so many bathrooms? The answer lies partly in Rome's obsession with hygiene and public health. Sure, they didn't understand germ theory, but they did know that clean streets and flowing water kept disease away. Latrines were connected to Rome's famous sewer system, the Cloaca Maxima. This enormous underground network flushed waste out of the city using gravity and the Tiber River. It was engineering magic, and it worked well enough that parts of the cloaca still exist today. Historians still argue whether the sewers actually improved public health or simply masked deeper sanitation issues, especially during the empire's later years. But there's no question the infrastructure was ahead of its time. Romans also believed in the virtue of order and routine. The idea of walking miles to relieve yourself behind a tree? Barbaric. Toilets were part of civilization. Having them spaced evenly throughout the city allowed merchants, travelers, and busy citizens to live efficiently. Need to use the restroom while shopping? Just pop into the nearest forica. Interestingly, many of these public bathrooms were gender neutral. Unlike today, There weren't strict divisions between men's and women's toilets in most public places. The Romans just didn't see the need. Modesty, it turns out, was not high on their list of virtues. You may also notice that many latrines are built near aqueduct junctions. That's no accident. Rome's incredible aqueducts didn't just bring water for drinking. They powered the entire sanitation system. Waste was washed away with a constant stream of flowing water. The Romans were, in essence, creating a citywide flush system centuries before modern plumbing. One strange theory suggests the abundance of public bathrooms was also a form of social control. Think about it. If people gather in predictable, shared spaces at predictable times, it's easier to monitor behavior. And let's be honest, nobody's likely to start a riot with their pants around their ankles. Whether or not this theory holds water, pun intended, it adds an interesting twist to Rome's civic design. And finally, we can't ignore the symbolism. In a culture obsessed with order, hierarchy, and empire, a public toilet was an equalizer. Rich or poor, senator or slave, everyone eventually sat on that same cold stone bench. Everyone used the same sponge stick. Everyone grunted under the same painted ceiling. You stand and stretch, grateful for your modern bathroom but a little impressed. The Romans didn't just accept bodily needs, they designed a city around them. And that's not something every civilization can say. You step back out into the open air, the sun now casting long shadows across the paving stones of the Roman street. A warm breeze carries the scent of baked bread and crushed thyme from a nearby stall. But, of course, that's now mingled with something less poetic. The faint, musky memory of the sponge-on-a-stick experience. Still, your mind is buzzing. You've just sat in the very heart of a Roman cultural curiosity. And now, the question follows you like a stray cat. How did the Romans make all of this work so smoothly? Because let's face it, hundreds of people using public toilets every day is one thing. But keeping them functional, flowing, and not reeking of doom? That's a whole other level. And tonight, you're going to uncover the quiet marvel that made it all possible. The Roman sewer system, a technological backbone that has more in common with your apartment's plumbing than you'd like to admit. First, picture the Cloaca Maxima. No, it's not a Harry Potter spell, though it sounds like one. It's Latin for greatest sewer, and it was Rome's main wastewater artery, an ancient tunnel carved beneath the city as early as the 6th century BCE. That's more than 2,500 years ago, in case you're counting. Now imagine standing beside it. The tunnel is wide, maybe 12 feet across in places, with stone walls slick with age and shadow. You hear the constant gurgle of water rushing underneath the city. Occasionally, something less pleasant bobs by. You suppress a shudder. But the Cloaca Maxima wasn't just a ditch for waste. It was a feat of hydraulic engineering, drawing on both Etruscan and early Roman know-how. Originally built to drain marshland, it evolved into a sophisticated system that connected public latrines, bathhouses, and even some private homes. Water from aqueducts would flow through these sewers, flushing waste toward the Tiber River. That's right, the same aqueducts that filled fountains and bathhouses also powered Rome's toilet flushing infrastructure. Multitasking, Roman style. Historians still argue whether the system actually improved sanitation in the long term or just moved the smell downstream. After all, dumping everything into a river has some obvious drawbacks, like contaminating drinking water for towns located downstream from Rome. But within the city walls, the Cloaca Maxima helped prevent waste buildup and kept the streets surprisingly clean. Emphasis on surprisingly. One quirky fact, some of these sewer tunnels were so large that maintenance workers could crawl through them. Pliny the Elder even claimed a wagon full of hay could pass through. Whether that's true or a touch of Roman exaggeration is debatable, but you have to admire the confidence. Imagine explaining that job to your in-laws. Yes, I'm a sewer navigator. Cloaca specialist, actually. You glance at your feet as if expecting to see some water rushing by, and in your half-sleepy brain, you can almost feel the gentle vibration of centuries-old currents echoing through the stone beneath you. The sewer system wasn't just practical. It was deeply tied to Roman ideas of civilization and pride. Public officials known as aediles were responsible for overseeing the sewers, ensuring they ran properly. And yes, some emperors bragged about improvements to the system like modern politicians brag about airports. Augustus, for example, boasted that Rome was no longer a city of mud brick, but one of marble, and silently one of functional drainage. But here's where it gets a little weirder. Some Roman religious practices tied into their sewers. Deep within the system, in places only the most daring would crawl, there were shrines, yes, actual shrines, to deities of waste and purification. One of them, Cloacina, was a minor goddess associated with the Cloaca Maxima. She represented not just filth, but the cleansing of it, kind of like the patron saint of plumbing. You can almost picture a toga-clad priest lighting incense beside a trickling sludge channel, muttering prayers for divine sewer flow. It's both absurd and kind of sweet. Only the Romans could spiritualize sanitation. Of course, there were problems. In heavy rains, the sewer system could backflow, sending water and less lovely things right back into the streets. And let's just say ancient Rome didn't have warning sirens for incoming poo tsunami. People would sometimes seal latrine openings during storms just in case. Still, for all its flaws, this was urban plumbing at a scale unheard of in the ancient world. No other civilization had anything close. Public toilets connected to an active sewage system? That wouldn't be standard again until modern Europe. That means your basic Roman shopkeeper had better sanitation access than your average medieval king. That's a bit humbling, really. And while most homes didn't have their own private latrines, those were reserved for the wealthy. Public access was frequent and free. You didn't have to pay to use a toilet, though you might toss a coin at a nearby bathhouse attendant for handing you a towel or oil. Using the bathroom in Rome was a civic right, not a luxury. Now here's a quirky twist. In later centuries, under Emperor Vespasian, Rome imposed a tax on urine. Yes, really. Full-on state-sponsored P-tax. Public urinals collected liquid waste, which was then used by tanners and launderers for cleaning leather and bleaching cloth. It turns out urine's ammonia content was a prized cleaning agent. So naturally, Vespasian saw profit in pee. When people complained, he famously held up a coin and said, "Money doesn't stink, pecunia non olet." You smile in the dark. The phrase still survives today. So now you know Rome's bathrooms weren't just about comfort. They were about science, engineering, religion, and profit. About building a world where bodily functions and public pride could coexist. Where waste wasn't hidden, but actively dealt with. Where even the dirtiest job had a place in the grand order of things. You glance back toward the now distant latrine, its row of holes gleaming faintly in your imagination. It's almost funny to think that behind the grandeur of marble temples and golden armor, a sponge stick and a sewer tunnel were what kept the city running. And somehow that makes Rome feel more real, more human. Because while empires rise and fall, someone still has to clean the toilet. You keep walking. The stone roads beneath your feet, smoothed by centuries of sandals and chariot wheels, curve gently downhill. A stray dog watches you from a sunlit doorstep, tail wagging in that lazy Roman way. Like even the animals here have absorbed the Empire's relaxed sense of dominance. But you're on a mission now. You've seen where the waste goes. You've felt the cool shade of communal latrines and marveled at the cloaca maxima. So naturally, your next question arrives like a bird landing softly on your shoulder. Where did all that water come from? Tonight, you step into the splashing, echoing world of Roman aqueducts. Those incredible stone highways of water that fed not just fountains and palaces, but yes, even the humble public toilets. Because you can't have a flushing latrine without a water supply, and the Romans didn't settle for a few buckets and hope. They built aqueducts, gigantic ones, miles and miles of elevated arches, underground channels, siphons, tunnels blasted through mountains with iron tools, and bridges stretching across entire valleys. The Aqua Appia, Rome's first major aqueduct, was constructed in 312 BCE. It carried water from sources nearly 10 miles away, and it was just the beginning. By the 3rd century CE, Rome had 11 major aqueducts supplying over 300 million gallons of water per day. That's right, per day. And no, you're not hallucinating. You pass under one now. A long, graceful archway of weathered stone, its silhouette sharp against the twilight. The Aqua Claudia, perhaps, built in the time of Emperor Claudius. You listen. Is that water you hear? Or just your imagination echoing centuries of splash? Some aqueducts ran above ground, their channels protected by lead, clay, or stone piping. Others disappeared below the earth, traveling through tunnels carved with astonishing precision. They relied entirely on gravity. No pumps, no motors, just a constant, gentle slope stretching for miles. Modern engineers still marvel at the mathematical genius behind them. Historians still argue whether some slopes were measured by sight, water-level instruments, or pure Roman stubbornness. But the result? Liquid magic. And that magic flowed into everything. Private homes, if you were rich, public baths, drinking fountains, and yes, public latrines. The toilets weren't just sitting there lonely and dry. They had water flowing through channels beneath the seats, flushing waste away. They had troughs in front, where that infamous sponge stick would be dipped. Some latrines even had a trickle of water cascading down the walls to freshen the air. Because nothing says luxury like a scented flush. One quirky feature? Latrines were often located near bathhouses but not inside them. This made it easier to divert water without mixing the clean with the less clean. It also meant that your trip to the bath could be conveniently paired with a visit to the facilities. A bit like how every modern mall seems to tuck the bathrooms behind the food court. As you follow the curve of the aqueduct, you start to realize something profound. This wasn't just plumbing. It was a philosophy. The Romans believed water should be abundant, accessible, and flowing. Water was life. Water was civilization. And so they brought it to the people, not just the senators in marble villas, but the farmers, shopkeepers, and yes, sponge users too. It wasn't perfect, of course. Maintaining these aqueducts was a full-time job. Debris, plant roots, mineral buildup, there was always something clogging up the works. Teams of workers, known as aquarii, were tasked with inspecting and cleaning the channels. You picture a guy with a tunic, a torch, and a very long pole, muttering under his breath as he pokes around in the dark. It wasn't glamorous, but it was essential. And politics? Oh yes, control over water meant control over the city. Emperors used aqueduct projects as power flexes. Augustus restored old aqueducts to cement his authority. Frontinus, a water commissioner under Nerva, wrote a whole book bragging about how well he managed the flow. Think of it as the Roman version of a mayor fixing potholes, but with marble, Latin, and a slight air of divine right. Here's a delightfully weird tidbit. Sometimes, rogue landowners would tap into aqueducts illegally. That's right, water theft. They'd sneak pipes into the channels to siphon off water for their estates, bypassing imperial taxes. When caught, they were fined or worse. Frontinus railed against them like a man whose sprinkler system had been sabotaged. You reach a quiet pool now, where an aqueduct spills into a stone cistern. The water glistens in the moonlight, and you imagine yourself dipping a toe in, maybe sipping the cold spring water like a traveler in an old epic. It's easy to forget in this stillness that all of this was part of a larger system. A machine designed to keep the city moving, flushing, bathing, and feeding. Historians still debate the sustainability of it all. Some argue that the massive infrastructure came at an ecological cost, diverting springs, draining wetlands, altering entire landscapes. Others believe the Roman water system was so advanced that it remained unmatched until the 19th century. Both could be true. But in this moment, as the night breeze flutters your robe, yes, we're giving you a robe now. It's dreamwear. You feel something else, awe, not for emperors or armies, but for the sheer logistical genius that let you sit on a marble toilet in the year 150 CE and feel the gentle whoosh of hygiene at work. And that water, that cool, gurgling ribbon under your feet, is still flowing somewhere. Maybe not the same stream, but the spirit of it, carried forward in every modern pipe and porcelain throne. So tonight, as you lie back and feel the world drift away, remember, the aqueduct didn't just feed the fountains. It fed a dream that comfort, order, and a good bathroom break could be part of what made a civilization great. You pause for a moment, letting the gentle echo of dripping water settle behind you. The aqueduct has done its job, and now you follow its legacy downhill, back toward the city. The stones feel a little warmer under your feet now, and you notice how the terrain subtly slopes, channeling everything toward the heart of Rome. Gravity working overtime, just like the engineers intended. As you round a bend, your next destination reveals itself. A long, elegant colonnade shielding the entrance to one of the Roman Empire's great indulgences, the Thermae, or public bathhouse. But tonight, you're not here to scrub your back or soak in the caldarium. You're here because behind the steam, beyond the mosaics, and tucked discreetly near the side, hides another important chapter in your ongoing relationship with Roman sanitation. The connection between public baths and public toilets. You slip inside, past men draped in towels and attendants with oil flasks. The air is warm, heavy with eucalyptus and chatter. The walls glisten with condensation, while tiny streams of water slither down marble channels carved with decorative dolphins. You pass a room with sweating bodies lying on hot stones, another where they're getting scraped with strigils, those curved, spatula-like tools that somehow scream both spa day and medieval punishment. And there it is, behind a modest door and a step down, a latrine linked to the very same aqueduct water that feeds the frigidarium and fills the cold plunge pool. It's a bit quieter here, less grand. No statues, no mosaics of Neptune riding seahorses. But still, you can tell it's part of the system, because everything in a Roman bathhouse was designed to flow. Water in, waste out. Comfort, yes, but convenience above all. Here's a mainstream fact for your collection. Almost every large Roman bathhouse included attached latrines. Some were tucked to the side, others directly connected to the main rooms, but always integrated into the plumbing network. The bathhouse wasn't just about soaking. It was a full-body maintenance stop. Scrub, sweat, snack, relieve yourself. in that order, if you were polite. But here's the twist. Unlike today's rules of separation between eating and eliminating, Roman bathhouses often doubled as social hubs, even for business deals. So it wasn't unheard of to take care of all your personal affairs in one outing. And yes, that included stopping by the facilities with a friend, deep in conversation, seated side by side on a marble bench with zero dividers between you. You lean against the doorframe now, watching as a man gestures animatedly to his companion while reaching for a shared sponge. No one seems embarrassed. No one even blinks. It's communal. That's the word. The Romans were nothing if not communal. Of course, they didn't have scented candles or privacy stalls, but they had clever design. The toilets often ran along the back wall, sometimes forming a graceful arc or complete circle. Beneath the seats ran two channels, one to carry away waste, the other for hand washing and sponge dipping. Water constantly flowed through both, preventing buildup and flushing it all down into the city's sewers. And speaking of the sewers, remember the Cloaca Maxima from earlier? The bathhouses were some of its biggest clients, with thousands of gallons of wastewater generated every day from hot pools, rinse stations, and, you guessed it, toilets. That sewer was essentially the empire's biggest backstage pass. Every drain, every splash, every little sigh of relief ended up in its deep, sloshing tunnels. Here's a quirky tidbit for your dreams tonight. Archaeologists have found amphor fragments, jewelry, and even coins in ancient Roman toilet drains. Yes, people dropped stuff. Maybe a ring slipped off mid-squat, or someone had a slippery grip on their denarius. There's something oddly comforting about it, knowing the ancient world also had phone in the toilet moments. And what about health? You'd think sharing a sponge might be a recipe for disaster, and you'd be mostly right. While the flowing water and constant flushing helped reduce buildup, these communal facilities weren't exactly antiseptic. Historians still argue whether the Roman obsession with baths actually helped or hurt public health. On the one hand, frequent washing and waste removal kept things cleaner than in some later European cities. On the other hand, shared tools, stagnant pools, and close quarters meant diseases could spread too. But the Romans didn't know about bacteria. They thought illness came from bad air, miasma. That's why they built tall ceilings, open windows, and let light flood into their bathhouses. They weren't just showing off, they were trying to keep the sickness out. Still, even with their misunderstandings, they got a lot right. Regular bathing, constant water flow, designing public spaces to include facilities everyone needed, not just the elite. You didn't need a gold coin to use a toilet here, just a willingness to share space with strangers and maybe sit closer to your senator than you'd like. You move deeper into the baths now, letting the gentle rumble of conversation and splashing feet lull your senses. A slave boy jogs past, balancing trays of fruit and wine. A woman dips her toes into a warm pool. Somewhere nearby, water gurgles from a stone lion's mouth into a channel that eventually, yes, eventually, leads to another latrine. It's all connected. That's the point. And in the spirit of connection, let's talk about gender. While many Roman bathhouses were co-ed at certain times, most followed a strict schedule. Women and men bathed in shifts or in separate sections. Their toilets followed suit. But records show that women's facilities were often smaller, less decorated, and located in less convenient spots. No surprise there, public infrastructure reflected the same social hierarchies as everything else in Rome. You reach a quiet corner now, where steam curls up through cracks in the ceiling. A faded mosaic under your feet shows dolphins playing with seashells. You like this one. The dolphins look smug. A final thought before we move on. despite all this water, luxury, and marble craftsmanship, these toilets weren't private. Not even close. There were no locks, no occupied signs. The idea of individual privacy, of quietly doing your business in solitude, wasn't really a Roman thing. That concept would come much later, shaped by changing architecture, religion, and yes, shame. But for the Romans, especially in bathhouses, the line between public and personal was always a little blurry. And maybe, just maybe, that's part of what made their world so oddly human. You step back outside, towel around your shoulders, moonlight brushing your skin. Another bathhouse behind you, another latrine discovered. The streets ahead are dark, quiet, and still flush with stories. And don't worry, we're not done yet. The air outside the bathhouse is cooler now, tinged with the smell of wet stone and lingering incense. You wrap your toga a little tighter. Don't worry, it's a nice linen one, not some scratchy wool nightmare, and head back into the Roman streets, where shadows stretch between lamplit walls and the city starts to exhale after a long, crowded day. You wander past vendors closing up their stalls and a bored teenager chasing a runaway chicken. It's surprisingly quiet, considering the sheer number of people who live within these city blocks. And that's what gets you thinking. How on earth did all these people manage their, let's say, daily business? Surely not everyone had access to a fancy marble latrine with a dolphin mosaic. That's because most didn't. Tonight, you're heading to Rome's high-density housing blocks, the insulae, where the vast majority of ordinary Romans lived. Think of them as ancient apartment complexes, several stories tall, tightly packed, and not exactly known for their plumbing. If the bathhouses were the marble mansions of sanitation, the insulae were more like, well, sketchy college dorms with an overflowing communal sink. As you climb the creaky stairs of one insula, your nose wrinkles. There's a pungent mixture of smells. Cooked lentils, stale wine, sweaty tunics, and yes, that unmistakable whiff of someone who just dumped their chamber pot out the window. Because that happened. A lot. Here's your mainstream fact. Most urban Romans in insulae didn't have private toilets. Not on the first floor. Not on the top. If you had to go, you had a few options. Make a trip to the nearest public latrine, hope the shared facility on your floor wasn't already full of regret, or just use a chamber pot and toss the contents out the window with a shouted warning. Something like, cave, or heads up, which, let's be honest, probably didn't help much if you were on your way home from a long shift and happened to be in the splash zone. The city even had laws about it. You weren't technically allowed to throw waste into the street, but enforcement, about as effective as a wooden umbrella. You poke your head into a small, cramped room where a family of 5 is eating dinner. Just beyond their modest clay lamp sits a bucket tucked into the corner, its contents thankfully hidden by a wooden lid. That's the family's chamber pot. They'll empty it in the morning or sooner if someone has a strong opinion about boiled cabbage. A quirky tidbit for your collection. There's evidence that some poorer Romans rented toilets. Yes, you could pay a fee to use a privately maintained latrine in someone's shop or courtyard, like the ancient version of buying a coffee just to use the bathroom. Hey, when you gotta go, and while we're here, let's talk about something rarely mentioned on glamorous history tours. Fullers, Roman laundry workers who washed clothes using, wait for it, human urine. Yep, it turns out urine was rich in ammonia, which made it a valuable cleaning agent. There were even urine collection pots placed outside buildings where passersby could contribute to the communal stash. That's right, peeing in a pot was practically patriotic. Which brings us to a famous Roman punchline. The Emperor Vespasian, known for stabilizing the empire after Nero's drama and the Year of 4 Emperors, also introduced a urine tax. He taxed the collection of urine from public urinals, those handy pots outside insulae and workshops. And when his son Titus raised an eyebrow at this less-than-regal policy, Vespasian reportedly held up a coin and said, "Money does not stink," or in Latin, pecunia non olet. So next time you grumble about parking meters, remember, you're not being taxed to pee into a bucket. Yet, historians still argue whether the poor had regular access to public latrines at all. While many Roman cities boasted dozens of them, they weren't always conveniently located. Some neighborhoods may have been practically latrine deserts. And for the elderly or disabled, it's hard to say. Some might have relied entirely on chamber pots and the nearest alley. Which, speaking of alleys, you continue walking now, slipping between two narrow buildings. The alleyway is dark, damp, and few, right? A rat scurries under a cart. Above you, laundry flaps in the breeze, and a bucket sits suspiciously on a second-floor windowsill. Let's hope no one had cabbage tonight. There's a low archway ahead, and beneath it, the glint of water in the gutter. That's the cloaca, again doing its nightly rounds. You follow its sluggish current down the slope, watching as bits of trash and organic contributions float by. Somewhere downstream, it'll all join the greater Cloaca Maxima on its steady march toward the Tiber. It's not glamorous, it's not marble, but it works most of the time. You pass another insula and catch sight of a small sign etched in stone near its base. It's barely legible, but you can just make out something like, "No urinating against this wall." That's right, some buildings actually posted P-bans, and certain fines could be imposed for breaking the rules. Did people obey? Let's just say those signs were probably replaced often. And yet, for all the mess, for all the chaos, these public toilets and DIY solutions formed the fabric of urban Roman life. They weren't just about sanitation. They were about community, routine, and survival in a city bursting at the seams. As you climb another hill, torchlight flickering on the cobbles, you reflect on just how much infrastructure it took to keep Rome from drowning in its own waste. And still, even with aqueducts and sewers and legal P-taxes, it never quite smelled like a fresh pine forest. But hey, neither does your gym locker room, and the Romans didn't have Febreze. So, the next time you flush your toilet and think nothing of it, send a little nod to the residents of the insulae, those unsung sanitation soldiers with their chamber pots and their cave warnings from above. Because when you're living 5 stories up with no elevator and no plumbing, every trip to the bathroom is a calculated risk. You're walking again, this time away from the chaos of the insulae and deeper into the parts of Rome that didn't get carved onto postcards. The streets are darker here, quieter too, just the faint slosh of water from a nearby gutter, the occasional creak of a cart will echoing down a cobblestone alley. You pause beside a worn column where ivy snakes its way around the stone, the scent of dust and oil lamps hanging in the air. For a moment, you close your eyes and imagine what this same spot must have smelled like in the midday sun. Horse droppings, fish sauce, hot bread, more horse droppings. But tonight, it's just you, the night, and a growing curiosity about one question. Who was in charge of all this? Because let's be honest, a city like Rome didn't run itself, especially when it came to poop. Enter the real unsung heroes of the Roman Empire, the public sanitation workforce. Let's start with your mainstream historical fact. Rome had an official sanitation force known as the Cura Urbis. That's Latin for care of the city. Doesn't exactly scream glamorous, but it was an absolutely vital job. These weren't senators or generals. These were the folks who made sure Rome didn't become a 24-hour open sewer. The cura urbis included a mix of public officials, laborers, and contractors tasked with cleaning the streets, repairing sewer lines, and keeping the aqueducts flowing. And before you picture a team of neatly uniformed municipal workers with reflective vests, adjust your expectations. These guys worked with picks, buckets, and what was essentially the Roman version of elbow grease. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some of the grimiest jobs were done by slaves owned by the state. These weren't just any slaves, they were often criminals sentenced to hard labor. Their daily tasks included crawling through sewer tunnels, clearing blockages, and, on truly tragic days, fishing out whatever had gotten stuck or left behind. Imagine that job interview. So, what are your strengths? Well, I don't gag easily. One specific role in this whole sanitation symphony was the foricarius, a kind of toilet custodian. This lucky soul would have been responsible for cleaning, maintaining, and, if necessary, refilling the sponge-on-a-stick buckets in public latrines. And yes, if you forgot your own sponge, you'd rely on the public one. Just hope it got rinsed recently. Now, let's get into the political side of things. Because if there's one thing Romans loved more than aqueducts, it was bureaucracy. The management of sanitation fell under various magistrates, including the aediles, elected officials who handled urban maintenance. These guys weren't just toilet supervisors. They oversaw market regulation, road repair, festival organization, and yes, making sure people didn't drown in bathwater runoff. And yet, historians still argue whether the system was truly efficient or just a series of band-aids stuck on a constantly leaking pipe. On paper, the Roman sanitation system looked amazing. In practice, well, remember that sponge bucket? You're walking now past a municipal depot. At least that's what it feels like. There are carts stacked with clay pipes, piles of bricks, and two grumpy-looking men covered in what you really hope is just mud. One of them swears as he hauls a leaking amphora across the yard. It seems like this is one of the places where sanitation equipment gets repaired, or just stored until someone higher up actually remembers it exists. Up ahead, you see a narrow archway leading to a manhole. That's right, the Romans had manholes. Not always round, sometimes square, sometimes missing their lids altogether. Beneath those lids were the arteries of the Cloaca Maxima system. Rome's sewers didn't just carry waste, they carried status. Being close to a functioning sewer line meant better property value and fewer unpleasant surprises in your dining room. But working in those tunnels? That wasn't for just anyone. The cloacini, or sewer workers, had to crawl through narrow stone channels with water up to their knees and not a lot of air circulation. And in case you're wondering, no, they didn't have protective suits or respirators. Just a torch, a shovel, and the will to keep moving forward. Still, there was pride in it. These workers knew they kept the eternal city running. That, without them, all the statues, columns, and imperial speeches wouldn't mean a thing. Back above ground, you stop beside a fountain trickling gently into a worn stone basin. This is a nymphaeum, a decorative public fountain, but it serves more than just beauty. It's also a source of clean water for nearby residents. You watch as a young boy fills a clay jug, splashing his sandals in the overflow. Water for washing, drinking, cooking, and yes, for flushing the latrines. Because here's something people forget. Many Roman public toilets weren't just holes in the ground. They were actually wet flush systems with water running beneath the seats to carry waste away. That water had to come from somewhere, and fountains like this helped feed the system. Of course, if the water ran dry or got diverted, the toilets stopped flushing, and then things got crusty. You move on, winding past a row of shopfronts now shuttered for the night. Graffiti is scrawled on the walls. Some political, some romantic, some that just say things like, Marcus was here and probably stank. It's nice to know some things never change. As you near the edge of the market square, you spot a curious stone slab. It's flat, carved with grooves, and stained from centuries of use. It was once part of a public urinal, likely used by men between trips to the baths or before morning prayers at a temple. The urine from here would have been collected and sold to fullers. Remember them? Our friendly neighborhood pee washers. And yes, the urine tax still applied. Vespasian's legacy, forever flowing. You rest on a step and let it all settle in. The workers, the pipes, the sheer choreography it took to keep Rome functioning. The marble columns and statues got all the love, but it was the toilet scrubbers and sewer crawlers who made sure daily life didn't collapse under its own waste. So the next time you enjoy a freshly cleaned bathroom stall at the airport, or curse the out-of-order sign taped to one, take a moment to appreciate the ancient Romans who started it all. They may not have worn gloves, but they got the job done. The night stretches on as you wander deeper into the heartbeat of Rome. No longer the romanticized empire of marble and power, but the living, breathing machine of public works, held together by grime, sweat, and more than a few questionable decisions. You're starting to see how this whole public bathroom thing wasn't just a quirky fact. It was the thread stitching together every layer of Roman life. Ahead, torchlight flickers against the columns of a low-slung building. Not as grand as a bathhouse, but still important. This is a public restroom attached to a taberna or roadside tavern. And yes, taverns had their own bathrooms. After all, if you're going to drink half a liter of watered-down wine, you'll need somewhere to put it later. You slip inside. The smell of spilt wine, stale stew, and warm bodies clings to the walls. A man is snoring face first on a table. Another is arguing with the innkeeper over the price of cheese. But near the back, past a swinging curtain of frayed linen, is a row of latrine seats carved into stone, with a gentle stream of water flowing underneath. Not quite a palace, but a relief in more ways than one. Here's a little-known but completely valid mainstream historical fact. Many Roman taverns and inns had on-site toilet facilities, especially in denser urban centers. In some cases, these were just single seats. In others, a small multi-seat latrine offered shared use by patrons or staff. Either way, public access to sanitation was baked into almost every corner of the city. You take a seat, not literally, unless you brought gloves, and listen to the water trickle below. Roman engineers designed even these backroom loose with care. The seating was ergonomically sloped, the drainage system continuous, and the air vents aimed to reduce odor. Not eliminate it entirely, of course. Let's not get crazy. Here's where we pivot to the next quirky tidbit. Romans sometimes used fresh rosemary or mint as a kind of ancient bathroom air freshener. Tied in bundles and hung near the lavatory entrance, or tucked into the folds of clothing, it was one way to soften the sensory blow. Can't knock it. Febreze wasn't an option. But this room also speaks to something deeper. How normal, everyday Romans interacted with public hygiene, not just as a rite, but almost a social ritual. When you used the bathroom in a public place, you were part of a larger cycle of urban life, bound by unspoken rules of courtesy, timing, and shared inconvenience. Historians still argue whether these communal bathroom habits created stronger social bonds, or just made everyone really good at ignoring each other's bodily functions. Maybe a bit of both. You step back into the night air, brushing past the curtain, trying not to inhale too deeply. Around the corner, you hear splashing, someone rinsing their hands in a public fountain. There were no soap dispensers or hand dryers, of course. Hygiene meant water, and maybe a handful of sand or ashes to scrub. Some wealthier homes kept little bottles of perfume or oil to mask odors, but in taverns like these, you hoped for a breeze and rolled with it. Now you follow a crooked alley leading toward a more upscale neighborhood, where the architecture shifts. The bricks are finer, the gutters cleaner, and the lighting, well, it's still fire, but it's classier fire. Here's where you get a glimpse of how the wealthy Romans handled their bathroom needs. Inside a patrician's domus, the toilets were private, often located just off the kitchen or in the garden courtyard. Why? Because water access was easier there, and because the smell was less offensive outdoors. The rich didn't rely on public latrines, not usually. They had their own seats, sometimes carved from marble, with polished lids and mosaic floors underfoot. You'd think you were in a jewelry box until someone flushed. Speaking of flushing, in these homes, cisterns or rooftop tanks often delivered water with enough pressure to whisk away waste, albeit slowly. It's not your modern toilet, but the concept was there. And many homes drained into the same public sewers as everyone else, because even senators poop. You're not above the cloaca maxima, my friend. Back outside, you catch the scent of something roasting in a bakery hearth. It's past midnight, but bakers start early in Rome. You peek through a doorway and see a row of sleepy-eyed workers kneading dough. There's a toilet just outside their shop, attached to the alley wall, likely shared by a few surrounding businesses. This brings up another peculiar detail of Roman life: workplace toilets. In larger commercial districts, guild halls, bakeries, and shops often had their own latrines. Tiny, cramped, functional, and usually dumped directly into the nearest drainage line. Regulations existed, but enforcement? Well, let's say it depended on whether the aedile had had his morning honey cakes. You pass a few more, tucked discreetly behind curtained doorways. Some are in better shape than others. One has clearly become a sort of hangout spot. Two teenagers sit on the edge of the latrine, passing a jug of something that smells suspiciously fermented. You nod politely and keep moving. Further up, near a grand-looking portico, a torch glints off a bronze plaque. You lean closer and squint. It's an old regulation sign, worn by time, but still legible. Something about usage hours and fines for dumping trash into the toilets. And just beside it, someone has scratched a rough caricature of Emperor Domitian picking his nose. Ah, democracy. You keep walking, the street now curving toward the Campus Martius. A vast public space once used for military training, now mostly hosting temples, shops, and theaters. Even here, there are public latrines, tucked beneath staircases and behind columns. Because wherever people gather, nature calls. And the Romans always answered. You stop for a moment, sitting on a stone bench worn smooth by centuries of other exhausted legs. Around you, the city hums, low and distant, like a whisper through time. Water runs in hidden channels beneath your feet. Somewhere nearby, someone is refilling a sponge bucket. Somewhere else, a cloak brushes against a marble floor as someone slips quietly into a stall. It's easy to laugh at the idea of an empire obsessed with toilets. But by now, you see it's more than just sewage and sponges. It's infrastructure. It's public health. It's the logic of a city built not just for the few, but for the many. Even if that meant everyone got to see each other's knees once in a while. You rise from the stone bench and stretch, bones creaking like an old wooden ship. The Campus Martius fades behind you as you drift toward one of Rome's most awe-inducing spectacles of planning. The public toilet inside the theater of Marcellus. Yep, even the theaters had their own lavatories, because nothing interrupts a tragic monologue faster than a full bladder. As you step through the shadowed arches of the colonnade, the hum of the city dips lower. A warm night breeze curls through the passage, and beneath your sandals, the stone underfoot feels smooth as soap, polished by generations of patrons who came for the drama but stayed for the facilities. The lavatory is tucked beneath the tiered seating, cleverly integrated into the theater's infrastructure. This is no accidental feature. Roman architects deliberately designed these spaces for high-traffic use, whether for nature's calls or a bit of post-play gossip. Because yes, the intermission bathroom chat is not a modern invention. Here's your mainstream fact for this section. Large entertainment venues in ancient Rome, including amphitheaters and theaters, often had latrines built into their designs. These were placed near entrances or under staircases, with flowing water to manage waste and foot traffic alike. Not glamorous, but incredibly functional. You step inside, and the space is dimly lit by recessed oil lamps. The air smells faintly of lamp soot, olive oil, and something vaguely medicinal, probably herbs hung to freshen the place up. A line of stone seats curves along the wall, each with the familiar semicircular opening and foot drain channel. To your left, etched in graffiti on the plaster, a crude doodle of an actor and a donkey with matching togas. Charming. Romans loved their bathroom humor, and the walls of these public toilets doubled as the empire's chalkboards. Quirky fact incoming. Some ancient toilets contain preserved graffiti that includes political slogans, love poems, or philosophical musings, like, "Happiness is knowing your sponge is clean," words to live by. There's also something oddly democratic about the space. Rich or poor, famous or forgotten, everyone's backside touched the same cold seat. The theater toilet became a great equalizer, a reminder that not even the star performers were immune to digestive consequences. The line for the latrine didn't care about your social status, your toga style, or whether you had a front row seat. Historians still argue whether these theater restrooms served as unofficial forums, places where public opinion bubbled out between performances, and censored and unfiltered. Some scholars even suggest that these social clusters shaped politics more than people realized. Imagine swaying votes while your neighbor fumbles with his tunic knot. As you step back outside, the moon has climbed higher, silvering the rooftops. A distant chorus from a nearby tavern floats through the air, off-key but joyful. You take the long way around the theater, past a fountain where two women fill clay jugs and gossip quietly. It's the city's rhythm: water, waste, washing, whispering. Your next stop is the Roman insulae, those towering apartment blocks where the majority of Rome's population lived. Unlike the elite domus, insulae were stacked stories high, packed with tenants, and made of timber, brick, and often more hope than stability. You approach one that leans ever so slightly to the left. Charming. A flickering torch by the door reveals its narrow hallway and staircase spiraling upward like a twisted spine. You head inside and start the climb. At the first landing, you spot a communal toilet alcove, shared by the entire floor. It's tiny, just one seat, chipped and stained, with a clay bucket beside it. There's no running water here. Waste drops down a vertical shaft, eventually winding its way to the sewers, or, if unlucky, piling up until someone is paid to clear it out. Yeah, waste management wasn't always majestic. Mainstream truth bomb. While Rome's elite enjoyed well-designed plumbing, most common folk in insulae used primitive facilities, often shared and poorly maintained. Overflow, backups, and smells? All part of the rental agreement. Now for something unexpected. Some scholars suggest that wealthier ground floor tenants bribed building managers for private toilets, either locked behind a curtain or hidden beneath staircases. A medieval version of the en suite. if you will. Historians still argue whether these toilet privileges created a class divide within Insuli, or whether sharing a single sponge stick just united everyone in universal disgust. You continue climbing. Higher floors often lacked any toilet access at all. Residents up top used chamber pots, terracotta or bronze containers they emptied out the window. Yet, pot tossing from upper floors was a real hazard, especially at night. You now understand why Romans developed the habit of hugging the walls as they walked. You reach the roof and catch your breath. Rome unfolds beneath you, a jumble of tiles, domes, and marble columns. Somewhere, water trickles through a lead pipe. Somewhere else, a bucket sloshes. It's beautiful in its own messy way. From here, you can trace how the city's sanitation needs shaped its geography. Latrines clustered near markets, bathhouses, temples, forums. Everywhere people gathered. Plumbing lines followed the topography. Builders laid out roads and homes based not just on status, but on where they could fit a toilet. You rest on the edge of the rooftop, the city pulsing gently below. You've now seen how Rome managed to build a public toilet empire, not out of luxury but necessity. Theirs was a city where population density, engineering genius, and civic pride collided to form a surprisingly modern idea: that every person deserved somewhere to go. Literally, it wasn't perfect. There were leaks, there were smells, there were probably some accidents no one wants to talk about. But still, it worked. And in the quiet, you wonder how many footsteps, over how many centuries, passed through these same latrines, traced these same steps, waited in line with that same impatient shuffle. Maybe not much has changed after all. You stand up, brushing off stone dust. The night stretches wide, and your journey isn't over yet. There are a few more secrets buried in the city's bowels. You smile at your own pun. Too easy. You descend carefully from the rooftop, the wooden stairs groaning under your weight, each step sending a small puff of dust into the air. Outside, the street is quiet again, the kind of stillness that only comes in the depth of night. The moonlight casts long shadows along the cobbled path, and you begin walking toward a place both revered and a little repulsive, the Tiber River. Now, you've already seen Rome's toilets, pipes, and clever sponge-on-a-stick arrangements. But all roads and most sewage lead here. The mighty Tiber, glistening in the moonlight, was the final act in Rome's grand sanitation play. Flowing, forgiving, and occasionally furious, this river was the city's ultimate cleaner. As you approach the embankment, a damp breeze meets your face, cool and earthy. The water murmurs beside you like it's carrying secrets, which frankly it is. Mainstream fact: for all the aqueducts and cloaca maximas, the Tiber was still used heavily for waste disposal. Human waste, animal carcasses, household refuse, even industrial runoff from tanneries and dye workshops. All of it made its way into the river. For better or worse, the Tiber was Rome's natural flushing mechanism. Now, here's the kicker: people also bathed in it. Yep, despite everything dumped into the water, many Romans, especially those too poor to afford a bathhouse, still used the Tiber to wash. Talk about multitasking. And that's not even the quirky part. Here it comes. Some Romans believed that bathing in the Tiber had medicinal benefits. Think of it like ancient river therapy. Clogged pores? Emotional distress? Rub some Tiber on it. Historians have found records of people treating skin conditions and even spiritual ailments with a cold dip in the city's filthiest waterway. You sit on a low wall and gaze at the sluggish current. Little bits of debris float by: leaves, reeds, possibly the world's oldest sandal. A dog barks in the distance, and somewhere upriver, someone dumps a pail of who knows what over a ledge. It splashes faintly. You instinctively lean back. The Tiber was more than a river. It was a symbol of Rome itself, powerful, unpredictable, and full of hidden currents. And like Rome, it didn't mind getting its hands dirty. Historians still argue whether the Tiber's use as a sewer contributed to ancient disease outbreaks. Some claim it helped keep the city cleaner overall, with its constant flow whisking away the worst of it. Others point to recurring plagues and illnesses, suggesting the river was a vector for sickness masked as sanitation. The truth, as usual, is probably somewhere soggy in the middle. You rise and continue along the bank. Not far ahead, near one of the city's oldest bridges, you spot a strange sight. A row of tall stone urinals, tucked behind a low wall and angled toward the water. Yep, public urinals, free to use, placed strategically near the river for easy flushing. These weren't fancy, just slabs with a hole and a bit of privacy. But they worked. And for the average Roman man on his way home from the tavern, this was a welcome pit stop. You pass a man swaying slightly, whistling to himself, clearly making good use of the facilities. He nods at you as he finishes, and you nod back. Nothing bonds strangers quite like public plumbing. A short walk brings you to a small riverside market now closed for the night. You pass empty stalls and carts, some covered with tarp, others with bits of produce still clinging to the corners, tomatoes, herbs, a few squashed figs. And you notice something clever: tiny drainage channels carved into the ground between the stalls. These mini gutters were part of a smart design. Marketplaces had their own waste disposal setups, letting blood from butchers, fish scales from vendors, and who knows what from pickpockets flow harmlessly down toward the Tiber. Neat, efficient, and slightly unsettling. There's a smell here hard to describe. Not foul exactly, just lived in. Wet wood, stale wine, river silt. You take a deep breath. It's oddly comforting. You pause beside an old man asleep against a crate. His dog curled beside him. A small clay chamber pot sits near his feet, probably used earlier in the evening. It's a quiet reminder. Not everyone had access to Rome's plumbing, even in all its smelly glory. And that's the strange truth of Roman sanitation. It was advanced, yes, but not universally accessible. The rich had private latrines with mosaic floors. The poor had pots. The really poor had alleys. And everyone else danced somewhere in between. You follow a narrow lane away from the river now, toward the edge of a residential district. Here, tucked between apartment blocks, is something you didn't expect to see again tonight. A tiny public latrine, clean and surprisingly cozy. A leftover, perhaps, from a wealthier era. You slip inside. There's only one seat, and beside it, a sponge stick resting in a jar of vinegar water. Sanitation, Roman style. You smile. Familiar now. A small torch flickers on the wall, casting your shadow in long, sleepy lines. You sit, not on the seat, but on the cool stone bench beside it, and lean your head back. There's a quiet hum here, not from people, but from memory. This place, like so many others in Rome, holds the echoes of thousands of lives. People who came in a hurry or lingered with friends. People who laughed at rude graffiti, who grumbled about cold water, who dropped their last coin into the drain by mistake. And somehow, through all of it, Rome kept flowing. Because in the end, that's what sanitation is about: motion, movement, getting rid of what no longer serves so something new can take its place. A rat scurries across the floor. You don't even flinch. You're deep in it now, the strange, slightly smelly heartbeat of a city that believed hygiene was a public service. Maybe not perfect, but impressively ahead of its time. You rise once more, feeling heavier now. Not with burden, but with history. You push open the door and step back into the night. The city breathes around you. You step away from the quiet latrine and head toward the Subura district, one of Rome's most densely populated and famously chaotic neighborhoods. The cobblestones here are cracked. The buildings lean in like gossips exchanging secrets, and the air hums with the residue of 1,000 arguments, market deals, and nighttime regrets. Subura was the heartbeat of working-class Rome, a place of constant motion and questionable smells. You don't need to walk far to understand why sanitation mattered so much here. You pass by a tangle of wooden shacks, laundry lines strung like spiderwebs between buildings, and staircases that seem to defy logic and gravity. The alley you take is narrow, barely wide enough for 2 people, and as you shuffle through, you catch sight of a public urinal carved directly into the wall, with a shallow trough below it that slopes toward the street. It's aged, a little chipped, but still functional. A slow trickle of water washes anything away, feeding into the street drains below. This was the Roman solution to cramped living conditions: waste where you can, and let gravity do the rest. Mainstream fact: Rome's dense neighborhoods often used a combined drainage and waste system, with runoff water from fountains and aqueducts helping to rinse away urine and debris in narrow streets. Think of it like a medieval car wash for filth. As you glance around, a cart rolls by behind you. Its wheels splash through a small stream flowing along the edge of the street. You hear it before you see it, the faint gurgle of waste and water making its way downhill. No dramatic sewer opening, just an old trickle that refuses to give up. You're following it now like some sort of midnight waste detective. But it's here, among the chaos and clutter, that you see something truly peculiar. There's a public fountain, still running, right at a crossroads between several buildings. It's simple, just a stone basin with a carved lion's head spewing a steady flow of water. And guess what? Beside it stands a tall clay jar labeled urina. That's right, urine. Because in Rome, urine wasn't just something to dispose of. It was a commodity. Quirky fact time: urine was collected, sold, and taxed by the Roman government. That's not a typo. There was literally a urine tax, introduced by Emperor Vespasian. Why? Because urine contains ammonia, which was used for cleaning clothes and tanning leather. Roman laundries, called fulonicae, relied on it. Picture a grimy workshop where clothes are scrubbed in vats of, well, human donation. Then imagine someone getting paid for their pee. It's capitalism, Roman edition. You pause at the fountain, dipping your fingers into the cold water. It's surprisingly clean. In fact, these fountains were essential for daily life, especially for the poor. Many people didn't have access to private water, so they filled jugs here for drinking, cooking, and cleaning. And sometimes, because multitasking was a Roman art, they rinsed themselves too. Overhead, someone pours out the contents of a chamber pot. It lands just shy of the drain, splashing onto the stones. You sidestep the mess casually, like a seasoned local. It's just another day or night in Subura. There's laughter up ahead. You follow the sound and find yourself outside a popina, a kind of Roman dive bar. Patrons lounge on benches, sipping cheap wine and tossing olive pits onto the ground. The smell of garlic and fish sauce hangs thick in the air. A young man stumbles outside, walks to the side of the building, and, relieves himself directly into a street trough without missing a beat in his off-key singing. That's Roman sanitation in action, raw, efficient, public. Historians still argue whether this kind of street waste design made things worse or better in terms of public health. Some say the constant water flow helped dilute the filth, keeping disease at bay. Others point to outbreaks of dysentery and parasites and ask if maybe mixing public waste with public water was a touch optimistic. You move past the pop aina and turn into another lane. Here, a flight of stairs leads down to a hidden courtyard, and tucked into one corner is something unusual: a female-only public toilet. They were rare, but they existed, modest spaces with a partition for privacy and a little water trickling nearby for rinsing. And get this, archaeologists found evidence that some of these women's latrines had perfumed incense burners, not just for the smell, but as a kind of spiritual purification. Because if you're going to face a public seat carved into stone, a little rose-scented dignity helps. You step inside the dim chamber, simple, quiet. The seat is smooth from years of use, and the walls are etched with faint graffiti, hearts, initials, maybe a drawing of a rather unimpressive gladiator. It's these small things, the sponge jars, the graffiti, the incense, that remind you the Romans weren't all emperors and legions. They were people living messy, complicated, practical lives. You leave the courtyard and walk uphill. It's steep, and you're starting to feel the effort in your legs. Rome's hilly layout meant that sanitation systems had to work with gravity, directing waste downhill toward the Cloaca Maxima or the Tiber. The poor at the top got the stinkiest deal, literally. As you reach the hill's crest, the city spreads before you. Lamps flicker in windows, smoke rises from late-night hearths, and the faint scent of damp stone and cooked lentils fills the air. Here, overlooking the chaos, you spot a small structure, a janitor's booth, essentially. A man sits inside, sipping from a clay cup. He's one of the curators cloacarum, Rome's sewer overseers. His job? Making sure blockages are cleared, water keeps moving, and things don't explode, because trust me, they did. Sometimes sewer gas would ignite. Sometimes the street drains would back up. And sometimes, whole chunks of road would collapse, swallowing carts and all. Roman infrastructure may have been genius, but it wasn't flawless. You exchange a nod with the sewer keeper. He raises his cup in a silent toast, then returns to his vigil. It's a quiet moment. You're standing at the top of a city that never truly slept, kept humming by aqueducts and drains, urinals and sponges, bathhouses and filthy rivers. Rome may have had its flaws, plenty of them, but when it came to sanitation, they gave it everything they had, even if it meant bottling their own pee. You descend from the hill, your footsteps softer now, each one echoing faintly between marble columns and brick facades. The city has quieted, but Rome never really sleeps. It merely shifts moods. In the darkness, with only oil lamps and moonlight to guide you, the stone under your feet feels ancient and alive. You're heading back toward the heart of the city now, closer to the Tiber River. The air smells heavier here, not just with moisture, but with a faint mineral tang. As you walk, you notice the ground beneath you has changed. The stones are slick, worn into shallow grooves, ruts left not by feet, but by the constant movement of carts. These were the arteries of Rome's waste removal system, and you're walking right through the digestive tract of the empire. Because let's be clear, not all of Rome's filth flowed into underground marvels like the Cloaca Maxima. Much of it had to be manually scooped, hauled, and dumped. And that's where you meet them, the stercorarii. Stercorarii were Rome's waste collectors, the unsung laborers whose job was exactly as glamorous as it sounds. Picture a man with a leather apron, a wooden shovel, and a wheelbarrow full of... that. They worked by torchlight, removing human waste from chamber pots, cesspits, and alley gutters. Every morning before dawn, they'd cart it outside the city walls, where it was dumped, dried, or used, brace yourself, as fertilizer for farms. Mainstream fact: Roman agriculture relied heavily on human and animal waste as fertilizer. They even wrote farming manuals about it. The more pungent, the better, apparently. You can almost hear a Roman farmer saying, "If it stinks, it works." As you pass through a low gate near the Forum Boreum, the old cattle market, you catch the distant clatter of a cart. It's one of the night soil men, as we'd call them today, heading out of the city. The cart creaks with its burden, the wheels crunching along the gravel road. It's not glamorous, but without these guys, Rome would have drowned in its own civilization. A curious thing happens when you reach the edge of the city. You start seeing more privacy. Fewer communal latrines. Fewer fountains and sponges. Why? Because out here, in the villas of the elite, public wasn't just out of fashion, it was unthinkable. One estate you pass is massive, fronted by tall columns and manicured gardens. Inside, if you were allowed in, you'd find private latrines, usually tucked near the kitchen or courtyard. Rich Romans didn't just have their own toilets, they had flushing mechanisms too. Some were as simple as pouring a jug of water down the bowl. Others, fed directly by small-scale aqueduct branches or rainwater systems. All very civilized, provided you ignore the slave who had to keep the system running. Historians still argue whether these home-based systems were more efficient or more symbolic. Was it about function or status? Some think private latrines were largely performative, a way to say, "Look, I can poop in marble luxury." Others think it was a genuine escape from the unsavory chaos of public facilities. You take a moment to rest by a low wall near the river. The Tiber murmurs beside you, carrying centuries of whispers and waste toward the sea. You try not to think too hard about how much of Rome's filth ended up in that water. But you remember that the Tiber wasn't just a dumping ground, it was a lifeline. Cargo flowed up and down its currents. So did people, gossip, and ideas. And yes, so did sewage. Much of it flushed from the streets and latrines you've walked tonight. The Romans called it flumen sacrum, the sacred river. Sacred or not, they used it for everything. Drinking with some upstream caution, washing, even religious rites. The contradiction is beautiful in a weird way. This idea that something could be both holy and horrifying, both life-giving and stomach-churning. You lean against the wall and let your thoughts drift, just like the river. You picture someone sitting here 2,000 years ago, maybe after a long bath at the Thermae, drying off under the same stars, maybe also wondering why their city needed quite so many toilets. And it's not just the number, it's the obsession. The art, the architecture, the design. Some Roman latrines had mosaics on the floor and painted ceilings. Others featured statues of gods nearby, just in case you needed divine inspiration mid-squat. Quirky fact: there's evidence that toilet gods existed in Roman culture. The goddess Cloacina, for example, was the spiritual embodiment of the Cloaca Maxima. Her tiny shrine sat near the Forum. Yes, the Romans had a literal goddess of sewers, and they honored her with flowers and prayers. Because when your plumbing is that ambitious, a little divine backup doesn't hurt. You stand up, stretching your back. The street here is quiet, the wind rustling through cypress trees. The only sound is the occasional splash from the river and the shuffle of a distant patrol. As you return toward the city, you pass a wall covered in graffiti. Some of it is obscene. Romans were masters of rude doodles. But one phrase catches your eye: ubi bene ibi latrina. Where there's comfort, there's a toilet. It's funny. At first glance, Rome's obsession with public bathrooms feels like overkill. But the more you've seen tonight, the more it makes sense. In a city of 1 million people, sanitation wasn't just infrastructure. It was survival. It was dignity. It was a strange kind of pride. You step carefully across a narrow gutter and realize something. You've grown used to it. The smells, the sounds, the sloshing of water underfoot. What once felt chaotic now feels human. And maybe that's what these ancient toilets were really about. Not just getting rid of waste, but creating a city where people could live together side by side with at least a little bit of grace. You're back in the heart of the city now, and the streets are quieter than ever. The stone beneath your feet has cooled, and the air has thickened with dew. Rome seems to exhale around you, a sleeping beast wrapped in marble and tile. Even the fountains babble softer. It's the perfect time to slow down your pace and notice the little things, like how many of those fountains are nestled suspiciously close to. You guessed it. Latrines, because now that you've walked the breadth of Rome and explored its bathrooms in every shape and size, you start to notice a pattern. Wherever water flows, waste follows. Or maybe it's the other way around. There's a small public fountain just ahead, its stone lion head frozen mid-roar. Water trickles from its mouth into a wide basin. Beside it, half hidden by a flowering bush, sits a 2-seater public latrine. Modest, unadorned, just a slab with 2 holes and a little drainage. You wouldn't look twice unless, of course, you've been thinking about toilets for the past several hours, which you have. Mainstream fact: Roman engineers deliberately built latrines near fountains and aqueduct branches so that fresh water could continuously wash away waste and keep sponges clean-ish. These weren't accidental neighbors, they were strategically conjoined twins, part of the same infrastructural network. You crouch beside the latrine and listen. There's a faint sound like water running through a pipe. It's not just your imagination. The Romans used continuous flow systems in many latrines to keep things, quite literally, moving. It's sort of like flushing, except instead of a tank and handle, you had a never-ending trickle of aqueduct water carrying everything downstream. But it wasn't all clever design. This is Rome, after all, equal parts genius and chaos. You remember how wealthy Romans sometimes hired guards to stand outside their private latrines and shoo away unwanted visitors. Apparently, even in a society that loved communal everything, privacy had a price. Quirky fact: there's at least one surviving record of a latrine argument turning violent. A tavern owner in Pompeii, fed up with someone repeatedly sneaking into his shop just to use the facilities, finally posted a sign, "Use the alley or pay." Some historians wonder if bathroom turf wars were more common than we think. Historians still argue whether latrine disputes were simply class tensions bubbling over, or if they reflected deeper economic battles over access to resources. You wander on. A cat scurries across the road ahead, its silhouette flickering in the moonlight. Somewhere a baby cries. Somewhere else someone snores. Rome sleeps, but its bones, its pipes, its endless flow of water and waste are always working. And so you begin to reflect on everything you've walked through tonight. You remember the giant Cloaca Maxima, the artery of filth and salvation, the steamy, echoing halls of the public baths, where clean and dirty coexisted under one vaulted roof. The squat rows of latrine seats, side by side like pews in a church, a different kind of congregation. You think of the sponge sticks, cleaned communally and shared among strangers. You can't unthink them, honestly. You've come a long way, from luxury villas to tenement flats, from temple courtyards to moonlit alleyways. And the conclusion sneaks up on you like a rat in the night. For the Romans, waste wasn't a shameful thing. It was a shared burden, woven into the very rhythm of city life. Sanitation wasn't behind closed doors, it was out in the open, for better or worse. It was civic, even sacred. They didn't whisper about it. They built shrines to it. They carved it in marble. They laid pipes for it beneath their streets. They passed laws to regulate it. They designed an empire around it. You stop near the Arch of Titus. It looms above you, proud and eternal. Beyond it, the Forum stretches like a forgotten whisper. You've come full circle. In this moment, the sounds of ancient Rome fade into something softer. The lapping of the Tiber, the sigh of the wind through cypress branches, the slow hush of water forever moving through stone channels. And now we soften everything. The stones under your feet feel smooth and familiar. You imagine yourself reclining beside a quiet fountain, the kind that's been trickling away for centuries. Maybe there's a soft breeze lifting your hair, cool against your warm cheeks. Maybe the street lamp glow, though long vanished, still lingers like the last ember in a fire. You close your eyes and imagine the river again. Its surface shimmers like polished obsidian, drifting out to sea, carrying forgotten sandals and the echoes of a million conversations. You picture the sponge stick, yes, even that, with surprising fondness. Not for its hygiene, but for what it represents. A city that dared to engineer comfort for the masses. A world where even going to the bathroom became a shared cultural ritual. Rome may have fallen, but some of its pipes are still down there, still channeling water, still guiding the ghosts of baths and drains and quiet moments where people sat side by side, just being human. And now you breathe slower. The air grows heavier, more distant. The world quiets. It's time to drift too, like a paper boat down a moonlit Roman sewer. Let yourself go. Let your muscles relax one by one. Let the ancient city fade behind your eyelids. You've walked its streets, smelled its secrets, and sat on its stone seats. You've seen what few have, Rome's hidden heartbeat, pulsing through water and waste. So rest now. You've earned it. Tomorrow, if you like, you can walk through the aqueducts again. But for now, sleep.